Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. Cancer is something that is universally relatable to us all, and which of course at some point touches everybody's family. For some though it goes further and takes many members of a family, and Paul Harrington joins me now. He lost his mum and 4 of his siblings to cancer, and he joins me on this week's episode. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, Venetia.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming on.
Good evening, whatever you
Good
want
night.
it to be.
Cancer has just in one way become, I guess, for you, something that's, would it be fair to say, synonymous with your family at this point?
Well, there was. I remember many years ago, when you would attend a doctor, and they'd go through a questionnaire with you, and they would say, they'd ask you lots of questions. Say any history of cancer, and you'd say no, nothing. Any history of heart disease, any history of this, but that changed then. Then you one by one. So through my mother dying of cancer, my brother Robert dying of cancer. A different type. My sister dying of cancer, my brother Derek dying of cancer, and my brother Richard dying of cancer. Yeah. So let me see, that's Richard, Robert,
4,
Derek,
and your mum,
Siobhan, and my mother. That's 5 out of the 6 kids and 2 parents. So yeah, that all of a sudden the landscape changes, and
quite a quick succession as well.
Yeah, very much so. We're back certainly over around the. I think my mother was the first to go of cancer in 2002, and then very quickly after that, 2003, early 2003, Robert went and passed on, and then I think it was about 18 months later, under 2 years, Siobhan died, and then there was a break. But I mean, we'd lost our dad as well, the first, the leader of the band, but it was sufficient for me to wake up every morning for a long time just trying to figure out who was here and who wasn't. You'd wake from a sleep. That's when you did get a sleep, and more times than not I helped myself to go to sleep with whether it was plenty of pints or whatever it might have been, but certainly with plenty of distraction. So I do that still to a degree, but I dream about them all now in varying guises, and they come, and I still kind of have those dreams that that they're vivid, and you wake up in that split second where you think they're still there, and
so
it's real.
Still quite surreal.
Well, I guess it is. I mean, I just came back from Canada, and I was talking to my late brother Derek's partner, and she was talking about, she said, God, she said 9 years on, she said, I'm still grieving. So I had to go to, I went to counselling, and she also looks after her 93-year-old mother, who is quite frail. So she said, not only do I have this perpetuating grief, but I now have anticipatory grief,
like a living grief,
and she's of her mother, and it's. And I was saying to her, I understand how you feel. It's that sometimes maybe people living with elderly parents, you don't want anything to happen to them, but you're not wishing them to die either, But so, and I can relate to that now, having a young child who I'm now, I'm not, I was in perpetual fear. I now just kind of. If there's a thing worse than perpetual fear, that's what I have now. And I've always said to myself, if I'm going to, whatever it's going to kill me, I don't want to be frightened to death. But easier said than done with, cancer as well. There was something going back to cancer was that, I spent an awful lot of time then, checking myself every month, getting far too many scopes and far too many checks.
Because there is that thing and about when somebody dies, especially in quick succession, like you had, you just are going, I'm next. And there's when somebody dies, you also have this sort of heightened sense of, I don't want to call it hypochondria, but it is like you get your brain is telling you when you get a sort of pain in your leg or you get an earache.
Well, you go immediately to tumour and something that is absolutely lethal, you know, and the thing is, the truth of the matter is, it can be. That's the thing. So that's the other fear. That's the.
But by law of averages. And I think Robert said something to you as well.
Yeah, I remember him
by
talking.
law of averages, because your mum had cancer and he did cancer.
And he said there shouldn't
be any more
in that family. You know? So that didn't make a jot of a difference. Because I often think, like, if I'm driving somewhere, if I was driving down the country and I saw people thumbing a lift, I would never, ever, ever pick them up. But that doesn't mean if I break down and stick out my thumb that nobody will pick me up. You know what I mean? That's just the way. That's just the way. Nobody's driving by saying, "Oh no, he never picks anyone up."
Well, so, right.
There you go. There's some weird odds for you.
Yeah. But it is. I mean, it is that thing where, I heard somebody recently, and their husband had passed away young as well, and had left young kids, and they've just found out that they have breast cancer, and you sort of go, like, that's outrageous. They should be getting a pass. That's not right. No. But it's just not the way it works.
No. I listened to two young kids on the radio today who are carers, and the first kid was talking about what he had to do looking after his sister. And then the other carer was a young girl, trying to gauge the age, maybe teenagey, and she had to look after her mother, her father, and her brother, who all had different degrees of ailments and problems, and she's has no time for herself, and this is a kid, you know what I mean? So I just said to myself, like, can this get any worse? And yes, it can. And that's you have to. I think that's the nature of life. Life can be great, but I suppose as I get older, and in fact I am older now. I'm 65, and I really believe that, and this is talking with my wife. She's got a great philosophy that just life is a series of moments. Enjoy them as best you can, and she's not one of those kind of like, she's not one of these all good merchants. I mean, I can't stand those people when they come on the radio talking about everything's wonderful. I switch off. Bye. Because it isn't. Simply isn't all good at the moment in particular parts of the world. You know what I mean? So I can't stand that, because it's you're just lying to yourself. But I suppose you do have to try and find some balance, and you do have to try and reprogram yourself. I mean, I miss people. Every day I miss friendships from that are gone. I think it's a form. There's a form of I'm not going to go so far as to call it grief, but there is certainly a longing. I miss.
Well, estrangement is a form of grief. So if you become estranged from a friend, or there's a close friend and you fall out, that is a form of grief, or a marriage breaks. I have
a friend, a childhood friend, a close friend, and we were friends as teenagers. And I really, since about 2017, I have we've there's been no falling out, which is bizarre, but just a change of life and change of lives. And every now and again, I kind of say, well, that's the way it is. Things can't be forever. But then I say, but I miss that old friendship. And then you kind of go, well, pick up the phone, and then you say, well, why doesn't he? And and then, but
then one of you has to do it.
Well, but the truth is, I think you do explore these things, and you kind of go, well, actually, the reality here is neither of us are really that pushed to, and we don't have the time or the energy either, because we're at a different stage of our lives. I get that, and that's fine. But it's there you go. Strange.
But that, I mean, I think that's what it's like a marriage breakdown. Or, when you fall out with a friend, it'd be a natural, if it was a good friendship, not to grieve it.
True. Yeah, I mean, I think you do. Whether God knows, I into the mix. I went through that many years ago too, and that was a very tricky time, because, there was a young child involved. And there was those moments of, I mean, look, before I go down that road, I mean, this is something that was very pure, and a lot of it down to my bad decision making, immaturity, stuff like that. But the reality is the impact that it had on all of us. I mean, but I can only speak for the impact it had on me, and just the simple stuff like the trauma of walking into a supermarket and looking at a row of nappies, disposable, and seeing that and kind of feeling I feel I should be there at that moment in that little kid's life, but I wasn't, so that's another grief, if you know what I mean.
No.
And it doesn't matter, whether I've rebuilt a relationship or whether everything's been fixed again. That bang, that car crash, that trauma, had a catastrophic effect on everybody involved. So that's a million miles away from cancer, but
it's still something you grieve.
Yeah. So it's probably something I still gently deal with as well, day to day,
With Siobhan and Robert and Richard and Derek and their cancers, how did they approach their illness? Was it with positivity? Or is positivity even a thing? And is that just annoying when people say that when somebody has cancer? Be positive.
Yeah, I think it really depends on who you are to begin with. I think that's it's like, as I say, like me or you or your kids or my kid. These kids come out pretty much formed in a way. You know what I mean? Even though you will influence them, but all of a sudden you start to see their personalities emerging. There's a better word for it that I'm reaching for now. Their temperament is already there, and provided you bring them up in a reasonable fashion, they're going to pretty much stay true to that. And I think that's the way people are. I've sometimes found it very irritating listening to people being super positive on television and radio, and how they approach it. But look, that's their business, and that's the way they deal with it. I know my sister Siobhan, she was fearful to the end, and that was tough. That was tough to watch. But you know what? I don't blame her. I would have been terrified as well. Yeah. So, I mean, I asked myself, I said, when I was watching her with her for, almost 2 years, from diagnosis to dying, I said to myself, where could she find any sort of comfort or pleasure in this? There was in her kids and in her a newborn grandchild, but I mean that was even pain, because it was there what she was going to miss. Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's there's nothing. To me, the only positive way you can approach it is if there's some degree, or doctors are saying there is a way out of this, and you can get to the other side of this. But when they tell you no, it's like and like how do you you're trying to catch your breath all the time. I mean it was tough to watch, and and yet my brother Derek accepted it. He was upset by it, and it was painful, but towards the end he kind of very much said, that's it, I've had my time and it's beaten me, and I'm going to go, and I love you all.
Do you feel angry?
Me?
Yeah.
That's a good one. I mean, I suppose there's people, close to me would often say, yeah, God, you're very angry at this and very angry at that. I can't honestly say whether I'm just actually angry at something that I'm supposed to be angry at. Yeah. But you see, I'm not afraid of anger. Anger is an emotion, So I'm happy to go with that. I mean, just once you don't act it out to a destructive point, as in, falling down the movie. Once that's
My
and
burger doesn't look like the burger.
Exactly, and then so therefore you then take a sledgehammer to the counter or something like that. So no, I don't do that. But I think what happens with the emotion of anger, I think it interferes with your tolerance of everything of day-to-day life. And
you become zero tolerant. I think.
Absolutely, and then you have to work backwards from that. So I mean, I would be more tolerant today than I would have been. But there are times in my life where there are pinch points where I know I have to walk away from, because I mean it's simple things. I mean I've where do I go with this one? Lots of, I don't know. I won't go into that because that's just too silly. Because it reflects something else. If I was talking about noisy environments or it's bad service or silly stuff. Stupidity drives me to distraction. And I hate to say that because I mean in our house we don't say that word. But you know what? Not saying it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Yeah. But,
it's funny, I think that you don't, or when you're going through grief, you sort of stop sweating sweating the small stuff.
Yeah.
But, like if the fridge door is left open and everything sort of goes to pot, you sort of don't really care. But if somebody is really annoying you, like you're trying to change your bin account, the bin company or whatever. Tolerance.
You can smash phones, by the dozen for that. But that's because that's not easy to negotiate. I mean, you can close the fridge door, but but try and change your bin account.
I mean, it may be a bad example, but in my head, I'm just thinking of two moments in my aftermath where he just went, I can't get the account holder because the account holder is dead. You can have me, and I want to pay you, please.
Yeah,
that is all. What don't you understand?
Well, it's they're the big systems that are in place that we that are just, I suppose they don't think that far. But I would almost go the opposite to say there is a point maybe where the little things don't bother you, but then there's a point where you can get really stuck on the little things. Something can really drive you mad, and I mean I don't know. To this day, I still, bad parking drives me crazy. Because it's inconsiderate. The way the city is now and the way the world has gone. I'm just watching. Wait till I tell you. Today I cycled here, and a policewoman, Garda, thanked me for stopping at the red light, and I said, "Okay." So
that says it all.
I said, this world has changed dramatically since I was growing up. And I said, but it's red. I said, that's what we're supposed to do, are we not? I said, well, most cyclists don't. And he went on about his business, and off I went. And the thing is, I love... I don't know what has happened. The world has changed. And you can't just keep blaming it on COVID, because that's past, and that is a past trauma. But it's time for us to move on a little bit from that now and just kind of go, okay, let's behave ourselves. There's too much in my opinion. This what I call civic unrest. Yeah. but then again, that could be just me at the stage of my life. Look, I don't know. I mean, there was a time when I had a big family that we could all have pints and talk about this and argue this and have a platform. I don't have that anymore. So therefore I can be seen.
You miss that the most.
I miss it. Yeah, I miss. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's and even like now with my wife and young daughter, which has changed my life just beyond. It's a love I never understood, never knew existed. But yet, the busyness of life has made us kind of not able to chat like we used to, and so therefore there's a lot of that is just inaccessible, because you're just about to say, will we have it? No, too tired, go to bed. And that's fine. But when that goes on for a number of years, then you become the guy like me talking to himself in the street, pointing at a badly parked car. So you can, the little things can make you look like a nut job, but they're symptomatic, I suppose, as well of
what you've lost.
And of the burden that you carry and that you bear, and I suppose when there's no kind of family or no talking or no, I mean, as they say, the old-fashioned therapy was people would go to the pub on the Saturday night and they'd all give out stink about everything.
Yeah.
As I always remember my dad, talking about when I was used to gig and play piano and sing. I still do that, obviously, but when I used to do it in bars when I was gigging like 8 times a week, I used to be at a loss as to why nobody would listen to me on Friday nights, in a particular place. And my dad always said, well, look, it's Friday, it's the end of the week. People just want to get everything off their chest.
Yeah.
They want to give out yards about the boss, about somebody who annoyed them, somebody who took their parking space, and so on. He said, and I said, you're right. I said, by Sunday, they're all very relaxed.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. So there's an element of that I miss. For example, with that friend of mine that I don't see anymore. I mean, we could have a great exchange and fix the world. But at least you left there kind of half sozzled, feeling like you've got a few things off your chest,
Do you think there's a bit of empathy fatigue in people as well? Like when you sort of, I don't know, sometimes you feel when you've lost a lot of people, and obviously that's first and foremost on your mind, and sometimes there's only so much, with some people. Then, when depending how you're feeling, you pick the people you want to go and see for a pint because
exactly. But I do hear you that's what happens. That's why as we therapy is there, because friends burn out very quickly because they say, oh, geez, he's not going to talk about the dead brothers again. Oh, for Christ's sake, none of that. But I do and I don't. I mean, if somebody said to me recently at a show I was doing at the concert hall, it was an old neighbour of my in Killester where the family home, and she said to me, I think it was the next day or whatever we were talking, and she said I love the way you mention everybody who in your family throughout your work and through your gig, but you don't overdo it, And I said, well, I have to. I can't go through an evening like that without bringing them in some way, shape or form, because they're missing. They're not sitting in the audience, So therefore, I have to bring them in some way, shape or form without kind of, burdening the audience. But
and does that help you when you're up there performing in front of like a sold out concert hall? Does that help you get through it, or can it be triggering?
If you have to be careful not to slip in, because you're walking an emotional tightrope, and but the thing is that's the deal with me anyway with a live show. That's the exchange. You open up your heart, and people do the same thing. So I mean,
also in fairness, your music. I mean, I was there with a friend who'd lost somebody 6 months ago, and during one particular song, she was in bits all the way through it because that song was triggering for her, and I suppose it's the genre of music.
Absolutely, and I think that's the it's cathartic for everybody. I mean, so I genuinely find that. For years I never quite knew why I was playing music or what I was doing, because the pressure, when I started doing it, especially being the youngest in a family of 6 of people who played music, who albeit they were all printers and printing background and stuff like that, but they used to gig at the weekends, and it was always there, but and a great release for them. But by the time it came around to me, I never quite knew what the point was, and now I get the point. For me, I get the point that it is a very hopefully enjoyable as well. But within the evening, there's an element of catharsis. What is it? Cathartic, or it's hard to say catharticism. Is it? Is that the word?
Right.
Yes. We might have to refer to our producer for that one. But
whether it's catharticism or not, I couldn't spell it, so we'll just go.
Nor me. No.
Do you like a lot of people feel that we don't talk about our grief enough, or that people don't listen enough, but do you think that's changed since you started this whole path? Since your mum died?
I think people in general are bad listeners. In general, I think there's something has changed in the world. You mentioned kind of an empathy fatigue. I think to some degree people have been moved away from empathy and it's been replaced by constant stimulus and distraction and deflection, and talk about anything bar what you're feeling. And that's, it's not true to say of everyone, but because bringing up something that is painful is not easy, but
it's also an invested conversation. It's not just like I meet you at the frozen aisle in the supermarket, you bring it up and it's like, oh, grand, see you, good luck. It's like it's you invest in that conversation, your time and your
it should be organic.
Yes,
it should be organic, though. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be kind of like, well, 10 minutes in, I'll ask them, how are you doing?
That.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. But it's something that
has to be natural.
You need to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. As I say, there's not everybody, but not everyone has the capacity, and I think that's where I made mistakes with people, with certain friends, with certain people. I just kind of it dawned on me that they just don't have it in them to go as far as I need to go. And that's, I understand, and there are professionals who don't, but they have the tools. Do you know what I mean? They don't necessarily have the empathy, but they have the skill to know. Okay, let's just go at this now, and
see where it brings us.
Let's get it out in the open. I mean, I've spoken with I remember the first time I went for grief counselling. An incredible human being that I spent a lot of time with over many years. But I think when I told him the sequence of events, he kind of dropped and put his head in his hands, just saying, my God, where do we start here, And I knew, and it was then when he said, look, bear in mind that therapy or whatever it's called, it is an exchange. That it's not. He said, it's not me here to fix you. It's for us to listen to each other, and I found it fascinating, And often there was a place where we used to go, and in wintertime, and it would get dark in the evening, and because we wouldn't have the lights on, and I remember talking in pitch black. Just knowing that he was sitting in front of me, just kind of almost losing ourselves, and then we kind of when we'd finish, he'd say, "Where are we? Where are the lights?"
Yeah.
But I mean, that's how engrossed we became. But you needed, again, if you're sitting with a friend in a pub, and something like that comes up, you can. It's not conducive sometimes to getting into all that. So I think. I'm talking myself in back into therapy now that I'm talking.
Yeah,
because I think it's important to have a space where it doesn't matter. And I remember my sister, God rest her, when she was saying the difference between a therapist and a friend is that you can tell a therapist the same thing over and over and over again till you're blue in the face, till they're blue in the face. But that's where the friends kind of finally say, oh no, here we go, he's going to start talking about this thing again,
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Which one is it this time?
Stop.
No, I listen,
no, but I don't.
I love and miss my family, but I mean, I'm at a different point in, and also I suppose, I mean, I spent my life living through my family. from when they were all alive to, and it's sometimes.
Well, I suppose coming from being the youngest as well, like they're the people you look up to.
Of course you do, yeah, and they weren't all perfect like me, and joke. They, sometimes you disapproved, and and then you realised how human they were, so it's been an immense study of the human condition for me, and the good and the bad. It's like sometimes, it's like that, the hiccups when they're gone, you kind of miss them for a little while. It's that, it's, or a toothache. But I won't say live or have lived in the shadow of them, but certainly in the influence of them and in the wake of them.
And how do they? Is there one now that influences you more than the other, do you think, in your life?
One of the past members?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of maybe Siobhan being your sister. You have a daughter now.
Different times. We had different relationships. Siobhan I miss terribly in that kind of, she was not an empath. That's means something else. But you know what I mean. She had that kind of. She was a listener, great listener, and she had great love for everybody, and forgiveness and kindness, and she didn't. She was the opposite to some of the other fellas who were, brash and sometimes difficult. But then there was Derek, who I idolised. I mean, because don't forget he emigrated to Canada in 1971, and he, I was 11, so that was a huge deal because, going out to the airport and sending him off into an airplane was like somebody going to their death.
It's like going to the moon back then.
To the moon,
yeah.
and never going to see them again.
Yeah.
And then at Christmas time, you had to book what was called a trunk call. To be able to call
hello.
them and talk, say hello, and nobody really got any time because everyone was passing the phone to each other, and it was chaos. And then when he would come home, I mean, it was just it was so emotionally charged. I mean, this left huge imprints, as a kid, and then again, look, don't forget, I was always, my brothers were playing in music. I was forever seeing them in newspapers. I was seeing them in magazines. I mean, I kind of, in my head, I said, well, I always remember going to school and when somebody would ask me, the teacher, not somebody, the teacher would go through name and getting everyone's name. When I would say my name, I just assumed that they would know who I was.
That weird. Didn't wear off.
No, that's true. But you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I don't know, I just felt our name carried weight within some sort of
Well, that's also
sphere.
Pride of them that you were.
Well, I was proud of them,
in such regard.
And everyone seemed to know them within the printing industry and within the music business. And again, I remember seeing a picture of two of my brothers with two other band members, kind of coming down the steps of a stairs coming off an Aer Lingus plane, or going to New York or whatever it was, and that might as well have been the Beatles to me. Do you know what I mean?
That's actually the image that just came into my head.
The truth of the matter is the fact that my father and everybody they were kind of in the business. They probably knew somebody who kind of did that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know any better. But and neither does the general public. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I now look at, as I miss them, I can really take all of the very good stuff now and look at it as a legacy. And even what I do today, I just came back from Canada and I brought home my brother's wallet, a wallet that he has had, I think, since early 70s, Wow. He held on to his money, that fella.
Was there cash in it?
But exactly, no way, good question. But why did I bring up him and his wallet? I've no idea why I brought that up. No idea. Anyway, oh yes, I know why. Because I was out in Canada, and for the first time with no brothers there, and not travelling with a brother because Richard had just died. And I was standing chatting to the guy at the customs flicking through my passport, and he asked me a couple of questions, and very nice. And then he said to me, he said, "And so what's the purpose of your trip?" And I stopped for a minute and I kind of said, actually, I don't know what it is. I think I'm coming here to see old friends. I think I'm, and then I was going to say I'm coming to visit my brother, but he's dead. So, because it's a place where I get a real sense of Derek, anyway, my point is I did wind up playing music with friends of Derek's, friends of mine, remembering the brothers and remembering the music. And I one of the evenings I was chatting, and I was just saying I was actually so grateful that I had almost like a new set of brothers out there that I could spend time with. So that was lovely, and I felt that was a real turning point for me as well. Don't get me wrong. I still, I this time last year I almost lost my life through pulmonary embolism. That's even harder to say than catharsis. So yes, so and I remember thinking long and hard. I was out of the hospital, and I was watching the Olympics were on. Celine Dion was singing, I think, and but I do remember I cried and cried and cried, and I couldn't figure out. I said, why? What? Where's this coming from? And it was the fact that I was actually crying for myself for the first time, because I nearly lost me, having lost everybody else along the way. And I should qualify, I have one great brother still with us, thank God, Joe, so I don't want to be ignoring him. But and I know this is a lot of this, the content of the subject matter of this is grief. And yes, Joe does give me grief from time to time. Just thought I'd get that in, as do I him. But but there you go. I don't know why I'm telling you all of that, but I suppose it brings
you full circle almost, doesn't it? Because you sort of, and they do talk about sort of, like last week's episode, we talked about sort of self-care and how you've got to grieve for your past life in order to look at the future in a sort of as well as you can.
Yeah.
So I suppose that might have been that's it now.
A moment, like the epiphany or the
cut-off point.
Yeah,
without saying, cut off.
It's because don't forget, there's part of that as well as kind of you grieve for a lot of the time you wasted in your life in the past, But the reality is there's nothing you can do about that. That's gone.
Yeah,
and
so no regrets, or do you have regrets?
Regrets.
I know.
I have a few. Then again, no, I don't know. Yeah, there are things I regret. I think it's foolish to not to acknowledge things you regret. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be, this time last year I couldn't walk. I couldn't go on a holiday. I couldn't do anything. I was ill. I was incapacitated. I was, a year later, I can cycle into you. I can walk around. I can, and I can go on holidays with my wife and my incredible daughter. And and I will be vigilant, but not as petrified as I was when she was smaller. When when you're handling this. What do you do with this? Which end is which?
There's no guidebook.
You're into the bath. Oh no, she's gonna slip. Anyway, so it's and of course I have a wonderful son who was. I know it's ridiculous between my son, myself, and Molly, there's 30 years between us all. It's kind of weird, but it is what it is. But he has something that's been lovely he lives in London, and I was nearly going to do the Cork thing, my son, the lawyer,
Yeah.
My son, the copyright lawyer who works for Universal Pictures in London. But he tunes into a thing I do every week on the radio, on the Pat Kenny show. And that was a lovely thing because we were able to, the ties that bind, he and I kind of really started to rekindle a certain aspect of our relationship. Through that, because it was kind of a homesick thing for him, and this was something he was able to look forward to. it wasn't a trunk call home. It wasn't a FaceTime. It wasn't a text. It was something,
A connection.
A connection is the word. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he's a great character, and I relish and enjoy getting to know him in a whole new way, which is great. I mean, it's regrets. No. I mean, there's no better time than now to rebuild your life. And I do feel, I suppose, that a lot of the pain and a lot of the fear has subsided anyway, and that's all you can hope for, because
Absolutely.
Life is ever changing. You just take it as you find it.
Paul, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.